I knocked out my best friend of 15 years on a Tuesday afternoon in my own driveway. And I'd do it again without hesitating for a single second. Let me back up. My name is Brennan. I'm 34 years old. I work in commercial HVAC. Estimating mostly, which means I spend a lot of time on spreadsheets and site visits, and not a lot of time at home during the day. That detail matters. That detail is actually the whole thing. 4 years ago I married my wife Stella. We met at a mutual friend's 4th of July party out in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. She was standing near the cooler, drinking a Yuengling, and arguing with someone about whether a hot dog was a sandwich. And I thought she was the most alive person I'd ever seen. We dated for 2 years, got engaged, had the kind of wedding that costs more than my first truck and lasts about 6 hours, and moved into a house in Doylestown that we could barely afford but loved anyway. Brown siding, black shutters, a maple tree in the front yard that turns an absurd shade of orange every October. I used to think that house was the best decision I ever made. Now I know it was the second best. The best decision I ever made was the one I made on that Tuesday in November, which I'll get to. My best friend, I'll call him my best friend because that's what he was. Or what I thought he was, is a guy named Trent. We grew up 3 houses apart in Lansdale. We played Little League together, got our driver's licenses the same week, were each other's best men. He stood next to me at my wedding with his hand on my shoulder. While I cried watching Stella walk down the aisle, he gave a toast that made every single person in that reception hall laugh. And then tear up. He told a story about the time we were 16. And I drove us 2 hours to a concert. And forgot the tickets at home. And how I spent the whole drive back apologizing. And he spent it telling me it was the best night he'd ever had anyway. He said that's who Brennan is. He said, that's self-getting. Someone who screws up and means well. And would drive 2 hours for you without thinking twice. I've replayed that toast maybe 100 times in the last year. Different feeling now. Trent lived about 20 minutes from us. He came over a lot. He'd show up on Sundays during football season with a 6-pack, and we'd watch the Eagles lose in creative and devastating new ways. He and Stella got along well. Too well, I understand now, but at the time I just thought I was lucky. Lucky that my wife liked my best friend. Lucky that my best friend respected my wife. Lucky. I was real big on feeling lucky back then. Stella and I had been trying to have a kid for about a year and a half. It wasn't working, and that put a certain kind of quiet pressure on everything. Not the screaming kind of pressure. Just the low hum of it underneath all the normal stuff. We'd done the tests, seen the doctors, were looking into next steps. It was hard. I don't want to minimize that. It was genuinely hard, and I think it changed things between us in ways I didn't fully recognize while they were happening. I started noticing things around August. Not big things. Small things that I filed away without meaning to. Stella getting a little stiff when I mentioned Trent. Trent being weirdly, almost overly casual when I brought up Stella. A text she got once at dinner that she turned her phone face down for, which she'd never done before. A dinner she said she'd eaten at home alone while I was in Pittsburgh for a site visit. But when I got back the kitchen was spotless in a way that didn't match eating alone. No pot, no plate in the drying rack. None of the little evidence a person leaves when they feed themselves at 7:30 on a Wednesday. I didn't say anything. I don't know exactly why. I think part of me knew that once I said something out loud, the shape of my life was going to change permanently. And I wasn't ready for that yet. The Tuesday it all came apart. I was supposed to be in Allentown for a walkthrough. That got canceled at 10 in the morning. I didn't text Stella. Because I figured I'd just come home and surprise her. Maybe take her to lunch, do something normal, break the tension that had been sitting in our house for weeks like a guest who wouldn't leave. I pulled into our street around 11:15. Trent's truck was in my driveway. The gray F-150 with the busted side mirror he kept saying he'd fix. Right there. Parked in my spot. I sat in my car at the end of the block for about 90 seconds. I want to be honest about that. I just sat there. Something in me already knew, already understood what I was pulling up on. And I sat there in my car on a Tuesday morning in November, and I had a 90-second conversation with myself, where I said, okay. You need to go in there and you need to see it. And you cannot look away from it. I parked on the street. I went in through the side door off the kitchen with my key, which I never do. I always go through the front. I don't know why I went through the side. Something animal about it maybe. I came in quiet. I heard them before I saw anything. Stella's voice and then Trent's, upstairs, and that was enough. That was all I needed. I'd already known, somewhere in the back of my mind, since August. Standing in my own kitchen listening to that, I just felt the thing I'd been refusing to feel for 3 months settle over me like concrete going hard. I went back outside. I sat on the front porch steps, and I waited. They didn't come out for another 20 minutes. I don't know what those 20 minutes were like for them, inside my house, in my bedroom. I know what they were like for me. Very still. The way things get still right before something breaks. Trent came out the front door first. He almost walked right into me before he saw me sitting there, And when he did, the color left his face so fast it was almost impressive. He said my name, just, Brennan. Like the word itself was an apology. I stood up. I looked at him. This person I'd known since I was 9 years old. This guy who'd been in my corner for every single thing that had ever happened to me. Who I'd bailed out twice, who'd helped me move 3 times. Who I'd called at 2 in the morning after my dad's stroke and who picked up on the first ring and drove to the hospital in his pajamas, without me even having to ask. I hit him once. Just once. He went down. I didn't feel good about it and I didn't feel bad about it. I felt like I had no choice, which is maybe a thing people say to excuse themselves, but in that moment was just simply true. Stella came to the door. She saw Trent on the ground and looked at me, and I looked at her and I said very quietly, "Get inside." And she did. What happened next was the conversation no one wants to have. Stella at the kitchen table, me standing, Trent eventually coming in holding his face. I won't walk you through every word of it, because some of it I still can't fully look at. But the short version is that it had been going on since June. 4 months. While Stella and I were going to fertility appointments, while we were sitting in waiting rooms together, while I was driving home from Pittsburgh and she was supposedly eating dinner alone, it had been happening. And then she told me the other part. She was pregnant. I'll tell you that I sat down at that point. My legs just stopped working for a few seconds. I sat down in a kitchen chair and I looked at the table, and I said nothing for what felt like a very long time. She said she wasn't sure whose it was. I said, "Get out of my house, both of you." Trent tried to say something. I don't even know what. Some sentence that started with "man, listen." And I looked at him, and whatever was on my face made him stop and stand up and leave. Stella asked where she was supposed to go, and I told her that wasn't my problem anymore. She asked if we could talk about it and I said we were done talking. She left. That's when my phone started ringing. Trent had called his wife, Diane. Wait, I need to stop. That name's in the file I can't use. Trent's wife's name is Priscilla. He'd called Priscilla, apparently, on his way out, because she was calling me about 4 minutes after they left, crying, asking what happened. And then my phone rang again. And it was my mother-in-law, which meant Stella had called her mother on the drive away from the house she'd just blown up, which is a thing that still strikes me unthinkable. My mother-in-law, I'll tell you, is a woman I'd spent 4 years trying to win over. She never thought I was good enough for Stella, and she was not subtle about it. She thought I worked too much, that my job wasn't professional enough. She worked in hospital administration and had opinions about what counted as a career. And she made those opinions known at holidays in the small, polished, weaponized way that certain mothers-in-law have perfected over decades. She called me in. The first thing she said was, "Brennan, I need you to calm down and think about this rationally." I hadn't said a single word yet. I told her that her daughter had been sleeping with my best friend for 4 months and was possibly carrying his child, and that I was completely calm, and that I'd appreciate it if she didn't call this number again. She showed up at my house 2 hours later. I didn't let her in. She stood on my porch, the one I refinished last spring, and told me through the door that Stella was going through something difficult and needed support, and that I needed to be the bigger person. I told her that I had been the bigger person my entire marriage, starting with every holiday dinner where she made me feel like a stranger in my own relationship, and that I was done being bigger. She said I was being cruel. I said I was being clear, and that there was a difference. She left. My dad came over that night, just showed up with Arby's, which is the only food he knows how to comfort someone with, and sat with me at the kitchen table while I told him everything. He didn't say much. He's not a much talking kind of man. When I was done, he just said, "Son, you know what you're going to do." And I did. I called a divorce attorney the next morning, recommended by a guy at work whose name I won't use either, but she's in Doylestown and she's very good. I sat in her office and laid out the whole situation and she said, "Okay, here's how this works." That's the kind of person you want in your corner during something like this. Not someone who tells you they're sorry. Someone who tells you how this works. The pregnancy situation took a few weeks to sort out. At least in terms of what it meant for me legally. I want to be clear here. I am not the biological father of that child. Pennsylvania law has certain default assumptions about paternity in marriage, which my attorney walked me through, and we made sure the record was clear. I was not going to be on a birth certificate for a child that wasn't mine, and I wasn't going to be financially responsible for a pregnancy that happened because my wife and my best friend decided to blow up my life. My sister was the one who told me, 2 weeks later, that Stella had gone to stay with her mother and that Trent had moved out of his house. Priscilla had filed for divorce. Good for her. I'd sent her a text after everything came out, just to say I was sorry she was going through this too, because she was a completely innocent person in all of it. She thanked me and said she'd suspected something for a while, and that she hoped I was okay. We haven't spoken since. Here's where things get complicated, or where people will have opinions. About 6 weeks after the divorce filing, Stella's mother called me again. I almost didn't pick up. I don't know why I did. Morbid curiosity maybe, or some leftover reflex from 4 years of trying to be a decent son-in-law. She told me that the paternity situation had been resolved. The baby was Trent's. She told me this like it was information I needed. Like I'd been waiting to hear it. I thanked her and hung up. Then she texted me 3 days later to tell me that Trent and Stella were not going to be together. That he'd chosen his family, which, I couldn't help noticing, was a thing he'd been unable to choose 4 months ago, when it would have actually mattered. And that Stella was going to be raising this child largely on her own. She said Stella was scared. Stella was asking if there was any chance we could talk. I did not respond to that text. I want to be honest about something here, because I think honesty is the only thing that keeps a story like this from being just a revenge fantasy. The months after this happened were not triumphant. They were not some kind of clean liberation where I suddenly felt free and started living my best life. They were bad. Like, genuinely, grinding, sitting alone in a house that smells like someone else. Bad. I had to pack up Stella's things and put them in boxes, and I had to do that alone. And there was an afternoon where I sat on the bedroom floor holding a book she'd left on the nightstand and just cried for about 40 minutes as that happened. And the Trent thing? I don't have a clean emotion about the Trent thing. It's not just anger. There's grief in it. You can't lose someone who was that woven into your life and just feel clean anger. It's messier than that. There was a Sunday about 2 months later when the Eagles played, and I sat in my living room alone and watched them, and I kept almost texting him about plays. Just by reflex. Just because that's what I'd done every Sunday for 15 years, and I'd pick up my phone and then remember, and put it back down. That happened more than once. But here is what else happened. I got honest with myself about what my marriage had actually been. Not the story I'd been telling, the good wedding, the brown house, the lucky guy with the great wife and the great best friend. But the actual thing. The fertility appointments where she'd been more closed off than sad. The way the conversation about having kids had always felt slightly off. Slightly like she was agreeing to something she wasn't fully in. The moments I'd dismissed because I didn't want to see them. I don't think Stella is a monster. I want to say that. I think she was a person who was in a marriage she wasn't fully committed to. And made a catastrophic choice about how to handle that. And the catastrophic choice had a life-changing consequence. I don't have a lot of sympathy for her position, but I stopped pretending she was simply evil because that was easier. She was a person. She made terrible choices. She's living with them. I sold the house in March. I know that sounds fast, but I couldn't stay in it. Every room was a room where something had happened that I now had to recontextualize. And I don't have the emotional energy for that kind of recontextualization project. I sold it and split the equity, as the divorce settlement required, and I took my half and moved into a rental in New Hope, while I figured out the next thing. My mother-in-law called once more. She asked, and I want you to understand. I am quoting her directly here. If I'd considered contributing to a college fund for the baby. I said no. She said that the baby was innocent, which is true, and that it wasn't the child's fault, which is also true, and that I was clearly a person of character, which was apparently her attempt at flattery. I said, I agree that the baby is innocent. I also have no relationship to this child, no responsibility for this child, and no obligation to fund this child's education. I wish the baby no harm. I'm not writing a check. She said I was being spiteful. I said, goodbye, and hung up. I blocked her number after that, and her daughter's number, and Trent's number. I was thorough about it. My attorney finalized the divorce in April. 11 months from the day I came home early from Allentown and parked on my own street, and sat in my car for 90 seconds. It felt like 11 years. Here is what I want to tell you, because I've been sitting with this long enough to have something resembling a perspective. The people in your life will show you who they are. If you're paying attention. I was paying attention. I noticed the stiff texts, the clean kitchen, the face-down phone, and I chose not to act on what I noticed because I was afraid of what acting would cost me. I thought I was protecting something. What I was actually doing was giving people more time in my life than they deserved. The people who told me to be the bigger person were never going to be the ones who paid the price for my being bigger. That's always worth asking when someone tells you to be the bigger person. Who's going to be paying for this bigness? Is it you? Great. Then maybe you have standing to ask it of me. Is it me, while you watch comfortably from the sidelines? Then I'm going to need you to be quiet. I'm in New Hope now. I run a lot. I reconnected with a guy from college, Patrick. Who, yes, I am sure is not on a list somewhere. And we started doing weekend hikes, which is not something I'd ever have predicted for myself, but turns out to be good for a brain that needs something to do with its anxiety. I have a better apartment than I thought I could afford by myself, which tells you something about what marriage costs in ways nobody talks about. I'm not at peace with everything. I don't think I owe anyone a neat resolution where I've processed my feelings and come out wiser and lighter. Maybe that comes later. For now I'm just someone who made it through something that felt unsurvivable, and turns out wasn't. Which is enough. Which is genuinely enough. Trent is still in the area. I've seen his truck twice at a distance. I've kept walking both times. There's nothing to say. The person I thought he was didn't exist, and the person he actually is has nothing to offer me. The maple tree at the old house turned orange this October. I drove past it once by accident, wrong turn, and looked at it through the windshield. It's a good tree. I hope whoever lives there now appreciates it. I kept going. That's the whole story. I kept going.